it's just useful so I don't have
Yeah.
to take notes. I can
Yeah,
have a
right, I
more
know, it's easier.
natural conversation. Perfect. Yeah, so as that kind of information sheet outlines, there's a sort of wider project of researchers in the UK and in Barbados looking at the reign of Queen Elizabeth in the context of more recent discussions about republicanism across the Commonwealth Caribbean. And my interest, the book I'm writing, is specifically on republicanism. So I was in Barbados just before Christmas, looking at their shift to republic. Also, then was in St Vincent, looking at discussions about having another referendum there. So yeah, that's my real interest in the Bahamas and whether that will happen, and why I really wanted to speak with you, because I know it's something you've spoken on in the past. Mm-hmm. So I wondered if I could start then kind of looking back at your earlier political career and kind of activism, and what the key issues for you were in getting into politics, and how significant becoming a republic was earlier on, or whether you feel like it's kind of it's something that's become more relevant for you.
Right, so I stepped out of high school,
Mm-hmm.
Just really wanting a career in politics, and so I started out as a journalist, and I met Pinling. He was a speaker at the graduation the year before I got out of school, so high school. So I met him, mm-hmm. and immediately just hit it off, and so my relationship with him endured actually till his passing, yeah. Even though there were some disagreements in the 1980s. So I've never wanted to be anything else but a politician, and, mm-hmm. and I continue to be that way. So I thought, not at the time, when I was graduating from high school, independence was the subject of the day. Could the country survive as an independent country? So there were lots of debates about this. But I don't think we ever considered, as high school students, whether it's going to be republic or whether it's going to be the continuation of the monarchy. But certainly by the time independence came, I thought we should have gone straight to being a republic. Mm-hmm. But even looking at some of the comments made, like about Loftus Roca, for example, who is still alive, mm-hmm. who was at the constitutional talks, who was a committed monarchist, they said essentially that they did not think they could sell independence to the Bahamas, to the Bahamian people, mm-hmm. if they went to republic, because the country is conservative by nature, mm-hmm. and essentially what they wanted to say was, don't worry, things are largely going to be the same. Yeah. So that's what happened, and I still think it's time to move toward a republic.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think then, in the current political climate, there's a consensus around amongst politicians around the shift to republic? I
think at an intellectual level, many do, but I'm surprised at, for example, we have national honors, and we didn't have sufficient strength in the cabinet to abolish the British honors. Mm-hmm. So we have this parallel system now where you have British honors. So you have the Order of the British Empire, which doesn't exist anymore, but people still want these awards. Yeah. So there's I'm always surprised, particularly some of my contemporaries who have not moved on at all, and they still want it. So that's part of the reason why there's been no action on it. And the generation of younger Bahamians don't seem to have any interest in it as a subject. Their feeling seems to me that it's the economy. Yeah. Do I have a job? What are the opportunities? Mm-hmm. It's all rather, sort of esoteric, the question of Republican, because I don't think anybody even thinks about it as a subject here.
And do you think then Barbados transitioning to Republic has raised the issue somewhat in terms of people's consciousness around it?
Well, it has, because of course everybody expected Barbados would be the last of the countries to do that, Jamaica, you would have expected to be the first because they're supposedly the most radical, but Jamaica's got a very conservative, I mean, the government itself is quite conservative, even though he says he's moving on, but we'll see.
Yeah.
So, it becomes a discussion point, and of course, because Mia Mottley is quite widely admired by women in particular throughout the region, I think it became a topic for discussion. But what made Barbados's issue easier is that Barrow, when he designed the Constitution, made it possible for the government by statute law to change the position. So you don't have to go to a referendum. And that's the issue here. We've had 2 referendum on matters which we thought should be easily solved. Gender equality should be simple, easy. Both went down in flames.
Yeah.
So people are gun shy.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody wants to fool with that.
Yeah.
And so that's largely why I don't think anything's going to happen here. Certainly there's not a consensus in the society on it. And I think the moment you put the question to people, everybody gets their backs up, and the first thing they say is, you'll end up like Haiti, of course.
Yeah.
Well, Haiti is a republic, that's true, but so is the United States, but, so.
Yeah. And because, as you said, Barbados didn't need a referendum, but also there had been kind of consensus amongst both political parties for a number of years around the question of becoming a republic. In terms of the PLP and the FNM, do you have a sense that both parties would support becoming a republic? That's still kind of a polarizing
the FNM
issue?
would oppose it.
Yeah.
They would oppose it not because they have any intellectual problems, they just oppose it because they're not the government. And the PLP, there isn't even a consensus in the PLP on republicanism. I think, again, people say nice idea, but, I don't think anybody spends too much time thinking about it.
Yeah.
So there are a few of us who speak to this issue, but I don't think it's got much support.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier referenda and the 2002 failed referendum on the Constitution, which I guess had a few different questions. Is there any scope for having, I don't know, a very simple one question referendum, whether that would make it, or is there any way around it that you can see of making it more
I don't see
straightforward?
any way around it, and I don't see any way around it if you're going to stick by the strict letter of the law, and I don't see any, of course you can just have one question, but usually, as you saw in St. Vincent, they can't defeat the government at the polls for a general election, but on a one issue, they can, because Grenada also had a referendum and that went down in flames too. They all failed.
Yeah.
And it's just because it's convenient to poke the government in the eye in midterm by saying, nope, I'm not going to do what you asked me to do.
Yeah.
So there's no chance of a consensus, I don't think, and there's certainly no consensus within the PLP on the issue either.
Yeah. I guess then, because Belize is the only country that, after Barbados, that wouldn't need a referendum.
Yeah.
So maybe that's.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they are. I was surprised St. Lucia announced that they are abandoning the Privy Council and going to the CCJ. I was surprised at that. But again, that's probably because they don't need a referendum to do so. Because I think St. Vincent tried, and that failed. Jamaica tried, that failed. So, yeah.
Is there any, outside of just the question of the Republic, is there any plans or scope for having any kind of constitutional review in the Bahamas, or not at the current time?
I think that's dead.
Yeah.
The best we're trying to do is to see how we can use the statute law to give equal rights for women. I mean, I think that's important. But Constitution, I don't think anybody's going to fool with that.
Yeah.
I keep trying to check the historic facts behind this, but I think that they said after the Irish got their constitution, they immediately abolished the one they had and then had a constitutional conference and just reframed the whole thing. That's probably what we should have done, is just just say, look, all right, we got this constitution, but now the heck with it. We're not even following it. We're going to just start from scratch using our sovereign right to do so. But we have stuck by the law, the letter of the law with these things. So I don't expect any change.
I wonder on that, because I've been reflecting my books a much more kind of longer historical perspective on constitutional change and politics, and on that question of the shift to independence and that sense of having to give an impression of stability, things aren't changing. And I wonder what your perspective is on how much that sort of means that the perception of the campaign for majority rule and for independence, the more radical youth influences on that movement are underestimated, perhaps, as a result of trying to give the impression of stability and not too much radical change.
Well, majority rule was a kind of extraordinary moment in the sense that it's fought mainly although not said this way, mainly as an anti-apartheid kind of campaign. I mean, the racial lines were so, people don't understand how the racial lines were drawn in this country. I mean, you just have to read Sean McQueenie's book, Breaching the Gate, or Race and Politics in Bahamas by Colin Hughes. And even though McQueenie says there were even laws that enforced this stuff, but mainly it was the social practices that really enforced it. So as a child, there was still remnants of this, where as a child there were white areas that you couldn't go into, otherwise you'd get beat up and stuff like that. So, but that has largely disappeared. So that was a kind of easy fight for everyone to join. But the consensus over where to go broke down very quickly after the 67 election, so that they didn't even last 5 years as a government. The government split, and that's how the F&M got formed. So, and they joined up with the people who were the previous government before the PLP. So, the last sort of bit of radicalism, if you will, was the 69 Constitution, which then lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. And I think that's the last sort of expression of that. And then Pindling was a late convert, they say, to independence, because he's quoted as leader of the opposition, basically talking about self-determination, but within the context of internal self-rule. He became a convert to independence by the 1972 election, and the election was fought on that basis. But after that, it was really the status quo. You had the royal visit here in 1977. The Queen opens the Parliament, read the speech from the throne, and every government since then has had one of those visits. So there was one in 95, I think. Ingram was the Prime Minister at the time.
94, I think that was.
Was it 94? Yeah. And then you had I think the Prince came here during the most recent, this Prime Minister, the Prince. His brother was here a couple of times. The Duke of Edinburgh has been here several times. I mean, judging from the response of the public when the last heir showed up here for the Jubilee tour, people were overwhelmingly pleased by it. So if that's any indication, it doesn't look like monarchy's going to go anywhere anytime soon.
And I noticed there were some smaller protests at the most recent tour, particularly raising the issue of reparations.
Yes, right.
Did you, prior to that, any of the 94 or '85 or any of the royal tours in the '70s, were there any kind of considerable protests then, or
No.
any issues not so much?
The '94 visit, you'll find, if you look at the newspapers, I was probably the only voice speaking about that.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't recall any protests. I was a public servant in 1977, so of course I couldn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I do remember my friend Loftus Roker, who's, as I said, probably the most vocal about maintaining the monarchy. There's this committee that the tradition is that the House, when the House convenes, there's a committee which is formed of members of Parliament, and they go to the government house or to see the sovereign and say the Parliament is ready to receive you. And he was so excited the day before. He was so excited about being chosen to be on this committee. And so the morning before the meeting took place, and the House is about to convene, he's teasing me. He says, "Well, I guess you fellows for the Republic are feeling sad today." I said, yeah.
Yeah. And do you, in terms of the protest last year and the campaign for reparative justice and the national committee that there is now, do you have a sense of to what extent that is directed at the monarchy, the historic involvement of the monarchy in slavery, to what extent the campaign specifically in the Bahamas would be directed at that?
Well, I think even the reparations issue is, most people don't see the sense of it. I think our Prime Minister takes a rather strong approach about it, but it's a legalistic approach because he's a lawyer, and he's been persuaded, I think, that there's much fruit to be found in challenging the reparations issue through the courts. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's an approach to it. The Rastafarian community has actually been leading this whole question. Mm-hmm. There's also I would say, a small group of what I call Africanists in the society, and they speak from time to time about the issue. But it's going to take the government to adopt it, and I think we're kind of half in, half out at the moment. We have a reparations committee. We've provided them with a budget to conduct their activities. And we'll see where it takes us. Their job largely, I think, at this point, is to try and build some consensus in the society about what to do about it.
Yeah.
And what helps is you have these recent examples like Georgetown University providing the scholarships for African Americans because of slavery, and then the Church of England just made a whole set of statements, and then you have the family down in Grenada. Yeah. So. You have these things, so I guess somebody will come up and say a similar thing in Nassau, I assume, and then that will become a point of interest.
Yeah. Do you think then, I sort of wonder to what extent, if there are difficulties to, in terms of seeking reparative justice, to say engage people on a governmental level to try and engage, say, the British government, whether, given that kind of recent examples tend to be, say, with institutions, universities, or the Church of England, is there scope, do you think, to engage the monarchy as an institution on that question?
They, I mean, I don't know what their personal views are, but just judging from the public statements that they've made, and I assume, I describe myself as kind of minimalist, right? So I would say this: the monarch, despite all the grandeur and the titles and the palaces and all the rest of that, is essentially a public servant. Yeah. And is a creature of the government of the United Kingdom. So they act on advice. He found out fairly quickly when he became king that he couldn't go around making all these statements about the environment anymore because the government simply said, nope, you're not supposed to say anything. And that's really what it boils down to. So, you have all the palaces and the this and the jewels, but basically you're in a construct that's pretty defined, and his mother, of course, God bless her, was quite disciplined with this. She just never had a word to say, period. You just didn't know what her thoughts were on anything.
Yeah.
Of course, he's had such a long gestation in this job that he's had, so he's been mouthing off all around the world about one cause or the next.
Yeah.
But now all of that has to cease. His son is trying to rebrand the institution, I think, to try and make it more relevant to even his own contemporaries in the UK, to make them seem more normal, sort of family oriented and all the rest of it. I don't think that. Well, I'm not sure that the brother. I don't think he's done the damage that he thinks he's done, or that he wanted to inflict on the institution. And I don't really feel very sympathetic to him at all. My own view is that you happen to be born into this institution, and there are rules about how it functions in the society that you're in. It comes with certain things, and one of those it imposes a particular discipline on you and what you're supposed to do. The moment you don't want to accept that, then fine, just step out of it. It's a free country. You step out of it, say what you want to say, but you can't have your cake and eat it too. And perhaps the brother, who's also in a bit of a problem, is coming to understand that as well. That the job comes with, even though it comes as a result of birth, it comes with restrictions which you have to accept if you're part of it. So that's essentially how I look at the monarchy, and I don't think there are, however, like certain, because it exists, there are certain reserve influences which it has. I mean, obviously these individuals, they campaign for their status to remain. They're close to the political parties, I assume, to protect their rights and privileges. And the people that they govern, at certain critical points, look to them so they have an influence at very critical junctures. So, for example, if you take the example of Thailand, when the military was being oppressive, there was a point at which the king could step in and stop the bloodletting, so to speak. Or the Japanese emperor said, look, the war's got to stop, that's it. We're not going any farther with this. And Paul Schoon, who was the Governor General down in Grenada when the Americans intervened, was able, they used that as the legal pretext for him to say, we need help to come from the outside. So there are junctures like that. I'm sure that if the present king is around long enough, and there was some political crisis in Britain, people at those junctures look to the king, even though he doesn't have supposedly the powers to order things, but the power of moral suasion is equally as powerful. So I think that's probably what is likely to happen in his case.
And I wondered on that. So there's been in the UK context, there's been a lot of high-profile kind of crises around racism in the royal family, and the issue of racism. The recent one with one of the Queen's close friends. Obviously, allegations of racism around Meghan, and then also a kind of frustration that the Queen never discussed or commented on the Windrush scandal. I wondered whether that had had much traction here.
The Windrush scandal, I don't think people paid much attention to it. I mean, because Bahamians weren't actually involved in it, I think. But Jamaica, for example, would have been very much concerned about it because their citizens were involved in it. but again, the nature of that institution, the nature of the institution itself prescribes them from saying very much about it. I mean, every statement they make is crafted as on the one hand, on the other hand, on the one hand, on the other hand. They just have to be, because they're not supposed to be engaged in the polemic of politics. All their statements have to be supposedly neutral, which of course they're not. But they have experts working for them to craft a brand which says, I'm not getting involved in that, while at the same time, being sensitive to the modern day demands of the kind of state they're in.
Yeah.
So that's my judgment on that.
Yeah.
And I think Chris Rock just had a comedy show the other day, and he was making fun of the lady married to Prince Harry, saying, the royal family wanted to know what color your child was going to turn out, and he said, well, that's not racist because every black family does that. Because he says, and you hit the jackpot because your kid was going to be light-skinned, So, I mean, and of course, every African American or black person here knows that that's the prejudice in our own society, that people prefer lighter skin even as black people. So, so I mean, that's just the other side of it.
Yeah.
But I don't, I think the two, I always say the two most dynamic public relations machines that I've seen are the papacy and the British royal family. I mean, they're really expert at just walking down this line, and are very adept at picking up, when it's time to shift ground just to the right way. So.
Yeah. I wonder. I just had a further question about the reparations committee, and whether I noticed. I think they did a report. Is that publicly available? The report that they presented, or is that still kind of ongoing?
I don't know. But have you been in touch with the person who runs the operation?
Yes, I contacted Dr. Hall Campbell. Maybe I'll follow up.
Yeah, because she'd probably give it to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because Philip Smith, he's the other person who's quite big on reparations here.
Okay.
Yeah, former member of Parliament. I'll give you his telephone number.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. Thanks. And I just my other quick question, just because I'm thinking about the 50th anniversary of independence, and as I mentioned before, I was kind of.
Well, you see, they're trying to invite the king to come here. He was the person who handed the instruments over when he was the prince in 1973.
Yeah.
And he just sent a note. I think what happened caused a note to be. Anyway, a note was sent back just recently, which is read into the House record yesterday.
Okay.
About the 1973 and how much he enjoyed it. When I met him, he said that he remembered sitting under the canopy on Clifford Park there, and in the middle of the ceremony, the canopy fell, and he said when they got it set right, what he remembered was the governor's wife. Her hat was askew, and he thought it was hilarious. This, So I mean, he remembers it, and he's got a lot of family, not close family, who live in Life at Key, so they know what's happening down here. Yeah.
So are they intending to send someone else, or is that still kind of in discussion?
Well, he's been invited himself, so you don't know whether he's actually going to come.
Okay.
But they just sent Edward was here just last week, I think, for the Governor General's Award. So. Okay. When you see this happening, I assume they've made a judgment that this is fertile ground, to keep things going.
Yeah, absolutely. On that, I was kind of wondering, so looking back to independence, and again the campaign for majority rule, I'm kind of interested in, when people look back at it, to what extent, in terms of how much the Black Power movement at the time influenced events, and particularly kind of youth organising in the Bahamas, the perhaps, as we discussed before, that real emphasis on stability around independence. I wondered, and perhaps a sense that that characterizing things as black power was less looked on less favorably, let's say. I wondered whether in the reflections back now, in a different political climate, I'm kind of thinking perhaps in the UK context of people really writing about the activism of that era and black power in the UK, I wondered to what extent that's embraced in terms of the way people look back at Bahamian history.
Well, let's put it this way. The Progressive Liberal Party, which is the African party, the African-based party in this country, was founded by mulattoes. All of them were like your color. And
like, is it Henry Taylor?
Henry
I was
Taylor,
reading his memoirs.
Cyril Stevenson, Bill Cartwright. So their policies were based in the social justice policies because they were all Roman Catholics.
Yeah.
And so I think Pius had written an encyclical about social policy or something. And basically they're saying, if you look at the first platform of the Progressive Liberal Party, it really is adopting the social policies of the Catholic Church and how you're supposed to deal with poverty and equity and all those things. As things evolved, Pinling, if you look at the picture of the first group of them when the party was formed, Pinling was the only phenotypically black person there. So all the rest were mulattoes or very fair skin. And pretty soon, the movement as it took off became a movement of phenotypically black people. And this led to a fault line. So you had DePuch, who was the person who claims that he eliminated discrimination by this resolution that was passed in the Assembly in 56, I believe, was also mulatto. And they were concerned about equity but not racial justice.
Yeah.
And by the time the reforms were done, you know, Alan Lennox Boyd, who was a Secretary of State for the colonies, came out here in 58 as a result of the general strike here and forced the then administration, on pain of the Imperial Parliament imposing the changes, to reform the boundaries, the vote on women, the trade union movement, all of those things.
Yeah.
So by the time 1962 came along, women had the vote, and most of the reforms had been done. But it still ended up with the UBP winning the government, so the whites were still in control.
Yeah.
The blacks then said, look, Taylor and these people, they just don't have it, and we need to have a more radical view. So they formed something called the National Committee for Positive Action, which was patterned after Nkrumah and the fight in Ghana.
Yeah.
I think it was he actually called his NCPA as well.
Yeah.
Right. So they named it that. And they began a more radical program of challenging the administration. The biggest of which was the grabbing the mace and throwing it out the window in 1965. And that, of course, ultimately led to, that was a dispute over boundaries, and then the election in 67, which ultimately, this election in 67 basically turned on the Wall Street Journal's expose on the government and its granting casino licenses to Freeport and at Paradise Island.
Yeah.
And that sunk their chances. They had another year to go before the election. They called the election a year early, and they were dead sure that they were going to win.
Yeah.
But time was up. The game was up, and so they lost. And I think that's as radical as it got. The Black Power movement never sort of took off here, I don't think.
Yeah.
Even though there was a black-white fault line.
Yeah.
But, Martin Luther King used to come out here. All of the black American stars used to come out here. Sidney Poitier, of course, was Bahamian and, helped with the fight, Harry Belafonte. But I think that's probably as radical as it got.
Yeah.
There was a socialist party called the Vanguard Party.
Yeah.
But they were a breakaway from a student group called Unicom. You know, so, and they frittered out pretty much by the time the 77 election took place. They were a spent force.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's more of a fringe.
Yes, right.
influence.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just on that then, in terms of the 50th anniversary and looking back, do you think that will be a big, say the National Committee of Positive Action, will that be, because so often, I mean, I've been looking back at all the anniversary editions, magazines, newspapers around the big anniversaries of independence and the sort of histories that people tell. Do you think there will be greater recognition, say, for the National Committee of Positive Action, or not so much?
I don't know. We have a construct for our political party, and we date the beginning of the modern political history of the Bahamas, the 1942, what we call the 1942 Burma Road riots, 1st and 2nd of June, and we say that's the start, really, of social change, social and political change in the Bahamas. In fact, the suffragette movement took off after the 1949 general election because a man came home after having lost the election and speaking to his wife. His wife said, well, you know, if women could have voted, we could have won this election because you would have had the support. And she started a suffragette movement out of that. Then you had something called the Citizens Committee, which was formed in 1950. And they were formed because Sidney Poitier's film No Way Out was banned from being shown in the Bahamas because the then administration said it was racially inflammatory. So that ban was reversed. And of course, when you look at the people who ended up being in various parts of the government after that, they were all members of this committee. And they thought, since they were largely of what was called the colored population, which is that of people in the middle, that this would have led to a political party, but it didn't. It wasn't until Cyril Stevenson and Bill Cartwright were coming back from the coronation in '53, and they stopped in Jamaica and had a chat with the Jamaican parties over there about how do you form a political party. Came back, called Taylor, and the three of them met and crafted this organization, which, as I say, is based largely on Catholic social policy. And it just grew from there. So the reason I say it that way is because I have, as chairman of the party, been trying to ground that construct as his official history of our organization and of the fight for majority rule and independence, really dating back to 1942. So I would think that's the group that you know, they're unsung heroes, and we've discovered who many of them were, because of course, you know, the British kept official records of all the people who were charged, their names and all the rest of that. So I think as it goes on, that's the direction I'll be going in. We're also trying to lionize the people who were the founders of the PLP. So we do an annual memorial down in Long Island to H.M. Taylor, who was the first chairman and leader of the party. Ironically enough, of course, Long Island is the most mulatto island in the country, and never vote for the PLP. Never. The hatred of black people is so strong among some people there. So but that's what I would think. I would think that's certainly that's the direction I'm headed in terms of, you know, taking responsibility for the movement such as it is. And then, of course, you know, Pindling being the sort of father of the nation. Great.
Oh, that's really interesting. Well, thank you so much. Honestly, it's such a pleasure to speak to you. It's been really interesting. Thank you so much.
I hope you get to talk to Sean McQueenie if you haven't.
Yeah, I haven't yet. I'll
Do you know how to find him?
Will I find him online, do you think? If I'm...
Well, I'll give you his number.
Oh, thank you. And you mentioned
Philip Smith.
Philip Smith was worth speaking to in regard to reparations as well.
So Philip Smith is 427 0899.
0899.
And Sean Queenie is 424 7751.
7751. Oh, fantastic.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Great. Yeah. But that book, Breaching the Gate, is quite good.
Yeah, I've been there's a really great collection now. I guess that's the building.
And of course, Sean was the chair of the Constitutional Committee, which made the recommendations about constitutional reform. One of which was, he said, no, inevitably we're going to go toward republic, but I guess not now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And he talks about that in Breaching the Gate. Oh,
Yeah.
great.
No, you can get the report,
Mm-hmm.
so that's where that comes up. But Breaching the Gate is about the way the laws were passed after the Haitian Revolution to try and protect the integrity of the state here,
Yeah.
as how it defined race and quite interesting thing.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I'll definitely watch it. I'll take a photo of this and then I can leave you with the original copy.
Okay.